Unless you're one of the first Americans, a Native American, you came from someplace else.
I was ashamed of it. How did we let that happen?
Gold, more than just a precious metal or an indicator of wealth used in jewelry. It is a key factor in controlling global economics, responsible for shaping history as we know it. In some ways, it has become a symbolic representation of human greed itself. Digging for gold, hunting for gold, and yes, killing for gold. Killing not just one person, but instead wiping out entire generations. Massacred, enslaved, starved, and in one particularly tragic incident, forced to march barefoot to their own demise for hundreds of miles enduring brutal weather and life-threatening diseases. This is the story of that very incident, when gold was worth more than thousands of people, tribes rich with life, history, and culture. An important chapter in Native American history, this is the unfathomable tragedy of the Georgia Gold Rush, and genocide known as the Trail of Tears. The 19th century is known as the Age of Gold Rushes in American history books. Although gold veins had been identified in North Carolina previously, most of it was left to the Native Americans who inhabited those lands. That was until 1804, when more intensive mining was taken up by American settlers. A rich gold vein ran through Georgia, and in 1828 that became the focal point of gold miners and those looking to get rich overnight. Although the exact origins of the discovery of gold in Georgia are debated, one of the more commonly agreed upon legends is that of Benjamin Parks, who discovered a pure gold nugget on the ground during a routine walk. This led to open advertising in newspapers for Georgia as the next gold jackpot, even though the land was not open to be claimed by anyone. In the 1830s, 125,000 Native Americans were settled around the states of Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama. This land had been occupied, cultivated, and harvested by their ancestors for many years. But the American settlers were looking to expand, not just for gold, but for everything the land itself was worth. And that meant things had to change at any cost. The culture of the Native Americans was not exactly in line with the modern doctrines of the settlers. It was seen as alien and uncivilized, and there had been efforts by President George Washington to teach Native Americans the way of the white man, such as conversion to Christianity, modern economics of private ownership, and English education. The tribes that assimilated these reforms came to be known as the 5 civilized tribes, which notably included the Cherokee, Choctaw, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Creek peoples. However, the American settlers only had their eyes on the Native American land and the rich gold veins in the grounds and rivers, which they intended to use for economic gain. Because of the open advertising of Georgia's hidden gold mines, flocks of settlers came to Georgia. Benjamin Parks himself said,
"It seemed within a few days as if the whole world must have heard of it, for men came from every state I'd ever heard of."
The U.S. Supreme Court declared the Native nations as legally sovereign, but President Andrew Jackson had other plans in mind. In 1830, he signed the massively controversial Indian Removal Act, which allowed the federal government to exchange the natives' land in the east for territory in the Western Indian Colonization Zone, which is now modern-day Oklahoma. The exchange of tribal land was supposed to be a peaceful process negotiated by treaties, but President Andrew Jackson ushered in the Army itself, and by the winter of 1831, the Choctaw tribe was forced to migrate to the Indian colonial West barefoot, bound in chains, starving to death and succumbing to diseases. In 1836, 15,000 Creek set out for the West. Just like the Choctaw, the Creek faced thirst, hunger, and infectious diseases. An estimated 3,500 Creek tribesmen perished far away from the lands they had tended and cared for, all to satisfy the endless hunger for gold and riches. It was no less than a genocide, and no amount of pure gold could ever undo the damage that had been done. The Cherokee tribe hoped that an earlier treaty signed in 1819 would grant them some leverage. Unfortunately, this would not come to pass. While a group of 2,000 Cherokees voluntarily migrated westward by boat in 1837, matters were about to get much worse for the ones that stayed behind. On May 26, 1838, 7,000 federal troops evicted the remaining Cherokee and 1,500 slaves at gunpoint. They were then stuffed like human rag dolls into wooden stockades and internment camps. The death march, known as the Trail of Tears, had begun. In the words of Reverend Daniel Butrick, a missionary in Georgia, from their first arrest, they were obliged to live very much like brute animals, lie down on the naked ground in the open air, exposed to wind and rain, and herd together like droves of hogs. In these internment camps, poor sanitation and harsh weather conditions spurred the spread of deadly diseases, such as whooping cough, dysentery, and measles. The horrors would continue in summer when the temperatures were unbearable and there was an acute drought. As a result, more than 200 Native Americans lost their lives. The heat was so severe that the whole operation had to be suspended until fall season, when the Cherokee convinced the federal army to let them handle the migration. The army agreed, but little did the Cherokee know they were marching towards certain death. If you are enjoying this video so far, please comment your thoughts, drop a like, and subscribe for more weekly videos just like this one. The total distance for the migration was 800 miles, mostly to be covered on foot. The tribesmen had nothing to protect their feet except some moccasins made of deerskin. Wagons were reserved for the sick, elderly, children, and nursing mothers. Over time, many became malnourished because all they had to eat was salted pork and flour. The situation got even worse as harsh winters set in. Ice and snow were already treacherous to navigate through. As the Native Americans were forced to camp and sleep in bare snow for weeks on end, starvation, typhus, diarrhea, and dysentery spread rapidly amongst the elderly and children. Their bodies had to be buried in unmarked makeshift graves. There was no other choice. Meanwhile, miners were rapidly depleting Georgia's gold reserves without the slightest regard for the price that had been paid in the form of human lives. This ordeal continued until 1840. Historians estimate that a total of 100,000 natives were forced to relocate, and around 15,000 died in the process. Several years later, a soldier who participated in the atrocities recalled, "I fought through the Civil War and saw men shot to pieces and slaughtered by the thousands. But the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." The federal government promised the displaced Native Americans that the newly established Indian country would not be disturbed by settlers. But human greed soon got the better of them. As the settlers pushed for more and more valuable resources and farming, the Indian country shrank until it formally became the state of Oklahoma. Today, the Trail of Tears is considered nationally and historically significant. Its various routes cover a distance of 5,000 miles over 9 states, and the National Park Service runs the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail. Tourists and individuals of Native American ethnicities cover the trail on foot, by horse, or by bicycle, in memory of those unfairly stripped of the land they worked so hard on for generations. Thank you for watching. Interested in more topics like this? Subscribe to our channel and click the notifications bell for new videos every week on more historical, insightful, and eventful realities.